Expansion, moving from policy to practice. This is the second webinar in our series where we're really showcasing LEAs and school districts and practitioners from around the state on how they are implementing multiple recent policies. Our last one was on attendance recovery, if you were there. And this one is focused on the big shift for districts moving from rate 2 to rate 1. My name is Jessica Gunderson, and I am the co-CEO of Partnership for Children and Youth, also known as PCY. And if you're not familiar with PCY, we work to improve the quality of and the access to after school and summer programs. We bridge policy and practice, conduct research that reflects what's happening on the ground, and build coalitions and capacity of programs and leaders to drive lasting systems change that improves outcomes for all young people. And we're really excited to be partnering and working on this webinar with our friends and colleague, the California AfterSchool Network. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Heather Williams.
Thanks, Jessica. All right, so great to be here with you all. A little bit about CAN. We exist to make a difference in the health and well-being of children, youth, their families, and their communities by strengthening access to high-quality out-of-school time programs, including expanded learning programs. So we truly believe that expanded learning and out-of-school time programs are a really important and critical leverage in California to ensure that our communities are thriving. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump right in. I will say a shout out to Malia and Leslie from the CAN team who are helping us behind the scenes, as well as Claudia and Katie. So we have a whole crew here that is making the webinar happen today. So thanks to y'all. And just a little bit about what we're going to be doing today. We have welcome, that we're doing introductions, framing the conversation. We'll talk a little bit about the 26-27 proposed budget. And then we have a wonderful panel of districts or folks talking about how districts are moving from rate 2 to rate 1. We'll close out, and then at the end, we'll have an optional small group breakout. So if you are interested in sticking around and digging into this a little bit more, we'll have small group breakouts. So with that, we'll keep moving along. So our goals for today, we're really hoping by the end of the session that you will deepen your understanding of changes in the requirements when you move from rate 2 to rate 1, hear about the impact of the proposed budget from the governor, and then really gather practical strategies and advice from districts shifting from rate 2 to rate 1. And then lastly, if you stick around in those breakout rooms, troubleshooting some of your questions. All right, and so introduction. So right now we're going to take just a moment. And so I'm going to invite you all on the next slide. Change your Zoom name to your name and organization. So if your Zoom name just has your name, go ahead and click in there, rename yourself so that your organization's listed. Feel free to say hello in the chat. We would love to know where you all are from, your organization, your district. And then we're going to drop in just a moment. There we go. There is a questions doc. So we're going to invite you to open that link and write one question that you're hoping to get answered today. So when you registered for this webinar, what were you hoping you would learn? So I'm going to ask Malia to play music just for a moment. We'll give everybody some time to say good morning and think about one question. Right, we've got a really great group of folks here, very diverse group, folks from all over the state, all the way up far north, Bay Area, down in San Bernardino. Awesome. Wonderful to have you all here. So, this Google Doc will be open for you all. So, as our panelists are talking, as we're going through the content, please feel free to continue to drop questions in here. We'll be using this to generate conversation later on with our panelists. And so, we will keep moving in the meantime. So, just want to share a little bit about, why we're having this conversation now. Um, we did have a significant number of our districts that moved from rate two to rate one, tier two to tier one. I know it's referred to a couple different ways by folks, but basically, if you were in that lower tier, that lower rate, a big change in policy in the last year bumped a lot of folks up to rate one. So if we keep moving through the slide deck, just want to highlight. Um, so we know that we were hearing from a lot of folks about how challenging it was to have rate two. Rate two was fluctuating. Um, Folks were unclear if they would, exactly how much funding they had. And we'll show you kind of some of the information and the breakdown between the two. Um, and while there's differences in what rate one and rate two have to provide, both still require significant programming and offering for our students. And so we had districts that, a lot of district advocacy around the rate two, rate one, what is truly an adequate rate two, and how do we look at getting more districts up to rate one. Um, and maybe down the road, everybody will be the same rate. But for now, making sure that more of our students have access to these programs. So on the next slide, I believe this has the breakdown. So tier one LEAs are now greater than or equal to 55% unduplicated pupil percentage. So this was 75%. So going from 75% to 55%, that is a huge shift. And so that means we have a significant number of districts that basically overnight went from tier two to tier one. And as you can see, in terms of offer and access, those requirements are different. The rates are different. So for a number of years now, the tier one rate has been set at $2,750 versus in 25-26, it's $1,575, which is actually up from the original proposal, but a decrease from 24-25. And so again, that's the fluctuation we see. So fortunately, we do have more districts now, significantly more districts that are at that stable rate of 2,750. But with that higher rate, it is expected that those districts offer and provide access to any and all of their students in TK through 6. Whereas if you are looking at tier two, it is focused on the unduplicated students, so offering and providing access. Of course, our tier two districts can offer and provide access above and beyond if they have the resources, but particularly with the fluctuating rate and a lower rate, that can be really challenging for our districts. So go on to the next slide. So growing your program from offering and providing access to unduplicated students versus all students is a huge shift, again, happening overnight. So part of the change in legislation and ed code when that happened was ensuring that there was basically a grace period for our LEAs. So for example, if you went from rate two up to rate one, you would be audited at the rate two requirements for the upcoming year. And then in the following year, you would then bump up. So you have a year grace period to continue at the lower audit requirements of providing, offering and providing access just to unduplicated students. So you can look at that year as your transition year to go from all unduplicated to offering and providing access to all students. So even with that grace period, that can be a pretty big jump for some of our districts. And so that's really why we want to focus on this conversation today. How do you, overnight or over the course of a year, build up your infrastructure so that you can support that increase in students? All right, and I think we'll be, yep, I'm going to pass it back over to Jessica.
Thanks, Heather. And yeah, to Heather's point, this expansion and policy change was maybe one of the biggest policy shifts we've seen in ELO-P since the policy was enacted. And we also know, all of us, that rollout when ELO-P started took a while and was bumpy. And so we knew that many LEAs with tier one funding had already gone through the experience of how do you ramp up to providing universal access. And so, in an effort to avoid reinventing the wheel, the purpose of our memo was really to provide those LEAs that were making this shift with recommendations from the field on how folks were planning for this, what worked before, what didn't work with this expansion. And how this memo was developed, and hope you've read it. If not, you'll have a chance to hear from two folks in our work group. But we had a work group of practitioners, which included LEA leaders, leaders from community-based organizations that worked in multiple LEAs, as well as representatives from the system of support and county offices who also play a really important role. And the purpose, again, of this work group was to share kind of key learnings from the initial ELO-P rollout, what lessons were learned, and how we could apply that to this new expansion. And so with the next slide, as Heather referenced, we just wanted to show you some data. We got this from School Fiscal Services, and this was a substantial increase. So roughly 300 districts made that move. As you can see, a significant number were also charter schools. They made up a large proportion. And when we say, 300, or if you look at the 185 non-charter schools, these were some of the largest school districts in this state. So has a huge reach. We believe hundreds of thousands of students now will have access to this program and their families. And so this kind of gives you a little bit of the scope and scale of that expansion. And then I'm going to move us to the next slide, which has our list of recommendations. And if you dig into those recommendations, they provide real world examples to how folks were navigating or planning to navigate this. And many of these recommendations are going to be highlighted by our panelists, so I'm not going to go through all of them. The other thing I want to note as you're reviewing these, and we review these, is that there wasn't necessarily it didn't have to go in a certain order. So some districts might have started on building from their current structures, whereas others started from shifting mindsets. And so when you look at the recommendations, one was around shifting mindsets, and this particularly came up a lot around how do you think with like leave behind a scarcity mindset to more of an abundance mindset. Also shifting mindsets on what these programs can and should be. The other piece that was really important was engaging in two-way transparent communications. And this was because, to Heather's point, overnight there was a policy change to shift to universal, but there needed to be clear expectations, both from partners and parents, about what the rollout of this expansion would look like, and that it wasn't something that could happen overnight. So you wanted to set realistic expectations. The next piece was how are we building on current structures? And so this spoke to both kind of are there already inter-district planning tables and infrastructure that's set up that we can build upon rather than starting a new planning group. Also, folks looked at how do we phase in this expansion? And so in some cases, we heard folks looking at the schools that hire the highest unduplicated student count and starting there or maybe with the school districts with the longest waiting list. So not everyone just rolled out across the district right at once. The other piece was how do we lean into current and new partnerships? And I think what this is a longer section in the paper if you look at it, and it breaks down both internal partnerships within the district and external partnerships. So that was really important as this program grows, you engage more and more departments or cross department within the district. One thing that stood out on this recommendation for me is that it was really important to have someone at that planning table with a bird's eye view to manage integration with other LEA wide initiatives such as community schools, MTSS, right? So there was a lot of other things either rolling out or interconnected with this rollout that needed to be accounted for. The other piece was how do you really lean into and create and build one single comprehensive program? I want to note here that the system of support is a particularly strong resource on thinking about comprehensive programs. Region 11 actually developed a great report, which we can try to drop in the chat on this issue that provides a lot of guidance that we found really helpful. Some highlights from how to really seek integration across programs and structures was one, avoid naming programs by the funding source. That can be confusing to families sometimes. How do you really, on the back end, blend and braid expanded learning program funding? And then how do you meet requirements for all the funding sources on the back end rather on the front end? The other piece that came up for our group is no one's going to be surprised by this. What are your strategic approaches to staffing challenges, right? With that level of expansion, staffing has always been one of the biggest challenges and something that came up right away for this group, which we'll speak to more. Also, as I mentioned, kind of with this communication, is how are we managing expectations? And then the last two is how do you design with the end goal in mind to really have a positive impact on students, right? It's not just let's meet the mandate, let's move fast, but really how do we think about what we want this to look like years down in the future and move backwards from there? So that was another piece. And then lastly is how do you set up all the kind of strategies, structures, and agreements? Um, Serving students with in special education or with 504s came up a lot. I'm not going to go into that deep. That is a whole report and webinar that we hope to do in the future on this topic. But I'd be remiss if it wasn't a big issue that districts wanted to talk about when we talked about this expansion. So that's just a highlight of this. Hopefully you'll look at the memo, but if not, we have our experts here to dig into it. Um, and then you can move us on. As alluded, not only did we have this significant policy change in the budget, but in the governor's proposed budget this year, we saw another increase to ELO-P funding. And you can move us on to the next slides. What we're learning is that there's a real deep understanding among policymakers that they need to provide predictability in regards to the rate for school districts and how do we continue to reduce the disparities between those two funding levels, as Heather alluded to. So this year, it hasn't been passed yet, but there's an additional $62.4 million in the state budget in ELO-P to guarantee a minimum rate of $1,800 per pupil for rate 2 LEAs. So that's moving forward. It's something we should continue to track. And this would bring up our total ELO-P budget to $4.7 billion. So this is something we'll be tracking and reporting on, but it's important to highlight that this kind of minimum and kind of guaranteed rate is super important. So with that, let's move into the most important part. And the funnest part is hearing directly from experts and practitioners from around the state. So we're really grateful to have these two panelists. These are two folks that I get to work with often. And whenever I have difficult questions on what's working and what's not, they're two people I go to. So first, I want to introduce Toby Pace. who's the Senior Director of Extended Learning Opportunities at the San Diego Unified School District. I need to note that San Diego did some of the biggest advocacy to make this policy change. So we would probably not be here if it wasn't for some of the leadership happening out of San Diego. I want to just note that. Toby's dedicated herself to education since 1998. With a student-centered approach, she has previously served as an elementary teacher, a principal, and now she leads the Extended Learning Opportunities Department. So we're so great to have you here, Toby. And before we dive in, we'd just love to get some stats and background on the program and San Diego Unified School District.
Yes, thank you so much, Jessica. And good morning, everyone. Happy St. Patty's Day. Just thrilled to be coming from you from San Diego Unified here. And as kind of our data shows, we were actually the largest district to go from rate two to rate one. So it has been a heavy lift, but we are super excited about the impact for our students. As you can see on the screen, our demographics are here. We specifically for our extended learning programs, we serve before and after school, our 30 days in the summer. We actually run our core academies at 144 elementary and middle. We also run ACES programs. We're a unified district TK through 12, not shared on here, but specifically this year, we went from about 15,000 last year to currently enrolled in just before and after school right now. We're at about 22,000 with a projected of the capability of universal access, which we'll talk about, is up to 55,000 eligible. Wow. So we're very excited, a little bit nervous for our open 1 week enrollment, which goes live next week for our summer programs. And then in April, we have our 1 week enrollment for universal access as well to go to those 55,000 kids. So we are definitely excited and just thrilled to continue to go into this work here. So like I mentioned, currently I think it's 52,482 for our summer programs, as well as we're looking forward to expanded enrollment for the fall. So excited to be here. Thank you, Jessica. Back to you.
Yeah, that is quite an expansion. Great. So I would like to introduce another one of my friends and colleagues, Eduardo Caballero, who's the executive director and co-founder of EDMO, which is an award-winning nonprofit engaging over 10,000 kids annually in both STEAM and social emotional learning after school and summer programs through multiple school district partnerships around the state. And Eduardo is extremely passionate about creating programs and partnerships to ensure that all children and staff have the opportunity to pursue their passions in life. Thanks for being here, Eduardo. Tell us a little bit more about EDMO before we jump into this conversation.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for inviting me, Jessica, and happy to be here and happy to be a resource for folks. Yes, we've been around for 22 years now, and really we've evolved along with our state really in creating equitable access to high quality out of school time programs. And we were particularly excited about this ELO-P initiative because it really is an equity issue. And for our kids, we know that so many kids before this didn't get access to high quality programs. We knew that wealthy families had access to the science and the art and the technology, and they knew the importance of these programs and after school and summer. And now we're able to bring these same types of programs to kids across the state and communities that never had these kind of programs. And we work in areas from rural areas and agrarian areas like the Salinas Valley, Monterey County, where folks never even knew what a day camp was. They only knew summer school, all the way up through and we opened the first STEAM camp in Salinas Valley in that first summer, along with some of our community partners out there. And then we work in urban areas like in West Contra Costa and Oakland and then all the way up into Lake County, where again there were not even camps were not even available to kids before ELO-P. So it's been a learning journey for us as well as we learn to work with school districts on this initiative and do the best for kids in the community. And I'm very excited to be part of this conversation today. Thanks, Jessica.
Yeah. And it's great to have both of your perspectives, both school district as well as community-based organizations, since both are part and parcel of this system we have in California. So I'm going to start with you, Toby. How have you been implementing, or kind of what were some of your concrete steps that you took to implement the shift from rate two to rate one, given all these increased requirements? And I
Yeah.
hope you mentioned the four C's somewhere today because it's one of my
Yes,
favorite things.
yes, the four C's, the four S's. We have a lot of different acronyms that we love. The P's, the principals, the partners, the parents. Uh, I like to really look at it from a systematic approach, and ultimately, we're super grateful. And Jessica, I'm glad you mentioned this of our advocacy up in Sacramento, as well as your advocacy and partnership, because we couldn't have done this alone. I will say with huge gratitude that that 1 year grace period that was added in at the last minute was a huge blessing, because going from doing this overnight would have we would have been remiss, because for us, we're student centered, so safety is at the core of everything we did. So we wanted to have safe programs. We know, um, as Eduardo mentioned, there's a huge disparity between those who can afford these after school programs to those who couldn't, and we wanted to keep that safety and quality of programming intact across our programming. So we worked closely with our partners. We have over 100 different CBOs, community-based organizations. We actually held listening meetings, and we first met with our licensed childcare. Those are our tuition-based programs. We said, hey, this is coming. We did this last spring, I think it was last March, and we're actually meeting with them again in April, saying, hey, how will this affect you, and how can we link arms with you? How can we transition you from a fee-based program to possibly partnering with the district to make sure you meet these ELO requirements? So we listened to those fee-based opportunities. We also created what we call a form, our intake form, because soon as it goes live in the public, all this money, trust me, I got a million different, can I speak to Mr. Toby Pace? And I'm like, wait, I'm a female, so I know you don't know me. So we created a process of equitable intake where we said, hey, do some self-reflection on these 12 quality standards. And then we started hosting bi-monthly meetings for any possible partners, to say, hey, would you like to become a partner with San Diego Unified? We need you. Obviously, it cannot be done alone. Toby and my small team of 8 people in my office running the second largest district in the state, it's impossible to do it alone. So we actually implemented our current partners, and we started doing listening centers with them. So how could we expand? And it was through that listening that we started seeing some, this is where the S's came up, the bubbling of staff. How do we expand these staff? How do we get space, the physical space on our campuses? We started walking through that, and I'll talk through that in a little bit. But really, it started with that listening, and I think you lifted it, Jessica, as well, about the mindset of, what is this? The intent behind this is so exciting in California, that we can offer quality programs for kids who may not have been able to afford it, or who might have been stuck at home on a computer or different things like that. But how do we create exciting, engaging academic intervention in the extended learning? And I always like to highlight that we are learning now 9 hours a day. So really helping our students in not just San Diego Unified, but across the state. So it started with really listening and started holding those partnerships. We also surveyed our parents, because parents, to our P's, we really leaned into, as we know, we need to send those surveys out anyway for our ACEs and ELO-P. We added a context question about, if you were, what are you looking for? What would engage your child? What would motivate them to want to come after school 5 days a week? So we surveyed them. We also surveyed our parents, principals, I'm sorry. We held meetings. We have 144 sites where we offer before and after school through ACEs and ELO-P. We actually held an input meeting, an AM and a PM, and then we went and visited those sites and said, okay, what are the barriers? And that's how that kind of came about. So it was really about a stance of, let's link arms. We know this is good for kids. We don't want to do it too fast, because with anything, you don't want to say, oh, I'll take any Joe Schmo off the street. We want to make sure that the staff is quality, that they're trained, that that the programs are engaging for our kids. So it was really a strategic approach and being transparent. I think our meeting in March last year, we were like, hey, Governor Newsom had this exciting plan. We don't know if it's going to lie, but if we were to input this, what would this mean for you? So it was a lot of active listening and gathering that input. That's where we started.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, and I was just going to name the intentionality and planning that goes into something. Well, policy sometimes changes overnight, but to do something right and do it well, as you spoke to, it sounds like there was just a lot of intentionality from a wide range of stakeholders to make this move. So Eduardo, yeah, I'd love to hear. I know you're in multiple districts that were making this transition. And how have you and your organization been approaching the implementation? Are there any concrete steps you want to share when you think about how this was being rolled out in at different districts?
Yeah, I've had lots of thoughts swimming around, like how to frame some of these things. I mean, one of the big things is like, we talked about mindsets, or you talked about mindsets at the beginning. It's in the report. Um, but really like having that conversation with your partners around like what are the paradigm shifts that you're trying to create through the program.
Mhm.
And I mean that in that, like, if you were in tier two, maybe you were just doing something to check the box. It might have been a very, you were in that scarcity mindset. Maybe it was more of a general program. You might have had two programs, right? You might have had programs for the fee-paying families and the ones for the funds who are ELO-P funded. And so when you move into tier one, you suddenly have you almost double the funding, right? And you have this, now you can have an abundance mindset, and you can have more clear equity mindset. So what do you want to do in this with this shift, right? It shouldn't be more of the same, right? It shouldn't just be like more kids in the funded program and the other kids over there, right? Or more of the general stuff that they're doing. Like, what are the paradigm shifts you want to do? Example, after school is basically glorified babysitting. Well, let's shift that paradigm to after school is a place where kids can discover passions and possible future careers, right? Like that's a real paradigm shift that you can create with this ELO-P funding. And so, taking a moment before you start getting into the logistics of how you're going to do the increase, right? Talk about what's the bigger picture? What are we really trying to do through this program? Um, and when you have that conversation first, that's going to help everything else you do down the way, because now you can align your teachers who are now going to have to give up more classrooms, and your administrators who are going to have more staff, who are going to have to support that after school program, right? If they're connected to the bigger picture, they understand, oh, this is why we have more work, right? This is why we have to give up our classroom, because we're trying to make equitable change in the community, in our community, right? So that's one of my biggest recommendations, is have that big picture conversation first. Um, then I know Toby talked about like surveying your community. Absolutely. Take a moment and listen to what your community wants. Again, before you start just adding things on, like some communities, maybe soccer is really big in that community, and so they really want a soccer program. Awesome. Another community, maybe they got plenty of sports, but they're starved for that science or that technology. They want their kids to have access to some of this stuff. So listen to what your community wants, create those sessions, and have multiple ways to survey your communities. Ideally, there are some things that you're already doing to engage parents. You have some current parent nights or parent breakfasts or whatever you're doing to like already engage families, and do it in a lot of different ways. I know some families, uh, the hardest ones to reach, you can't always reach them with an email survey, right? You have to do maybe a text survey, or again, like have a community event that includes food or something to bring folks in. Great, do whatever it takes. Hear what your community wants, and make sure you're bringing in all this different stuff. Again, we know wealthy families, they get the chess camp, the art, the science, the karate, the yoga, like they're getting all this stuff. This is your chance to bring all those things into your after school program, into your summer program. So listen to what they want.
Yeah, and what I hear from both of you too is not just about like how all this learning and input creates for the best design, but also buy-in, like the buy-in that's needed when challenging conversations are going to come up. And we will get to challenges here in a second. So Toby, I want to turn it back to you again on what's one key piece of advice you have for coordinators and managers on this call that are implementing this transition? And I assume this could have evolved too, over the last,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think Eduardo lifted it as well, but don't lose your core value of quality programming and listening. Uh, it is so powerful. I see sometimes when we get into education or fields, we're always growing. And I think the value of listening to your partners, because they bring a lens that I may not have. I may know, like, okay, I'm a district employee raised in public education. That's what I'm focused on.
Yeah.
But if I'm not listening to those other partners, like, what are the barriers? It was through that listening, those listening opportunities, that I realized, oh, I didn't realize, oh, staffing is an issue. How can we partner together? So it's really that mindset of listening to your partners, listening to your parents. How do we kind of come with that mindset of listening? So to me, it's, I always check myself and say, Toby, how can you grow today and be a better leader? And it's through having two ears and one mouth, double the amount of listening to those other barriers. Because if I came in with Toby's plan, it would not have been as successful as we are to now. So by listening and creating space, it's not always easy, but creating space to have those forums. We've done that, like even like today, like those of you who are on here today saying, hey, I want to learn how I can grow my program. That is constantly what I try and model and try and do. And also listening to those other perspectives of students. That was, I didn't mention that earlier, but we actually did a student input opportunity where we went to different, we have in San Diego Unified, we have something called clusters. So we went to clusters and we invited student voice to say, okay, what do you love about the program and where can we grow? So it's not like what's terrible, what's bad, but it's okay, what do we build on? What do we continue to do? But then where can we, what do we start? What are some things missing that we could really engage? So it's really from that stance of the state of being as you approach those conversations, but also making it intentional to host those input sessions, because it hasn't been easy. And you can put things in a memo, you can put things there, but by having those intentional input opportunities, it's really been helpful for us. And by no means are we there yet. I'll tell you, I'm really excited and nervous, but I think by intentionally listening and gathering that feedback and then designing a plan, co-creating, I should say, a plan together has been very valuable for us.
Great. And you mentioned space and staffing. So just want to flag, we will get to that question explicitly. I see a lot of questions from our audience about that. What about you, Eduardo? Is there anything you wanted to add to how you opened on just like one key piece of advice you would give to, a district or a district partner that is doing this expansion?
One I just realized I didn't mention is that paradigm shift of vendor to partner, shifting that mindset. Like, I know school districts, you do get bombarded by lots of vendors and people trying to sell you stuff, right? And there is, you know, when you're looking at your expanded learning partner, it should be different than your HVAC vendor, right? Like there are certain things that your vendors, your expanded learning partner really should be a partner. Toby mentioned we have a 9-hour school day now. When you actually add up all the hours of expanded learning that's required by ELO-P, it adds up to 75% of a school year. When you add all those after school hours and the 9-hour summers, that's 75% of a school year. Whoever you're partnering with to engage students for 75% of a school year, effectively almost doubling a school year, they've got to be your partner. It is a mind shift, because I know districts don't typically have this kind of partnership, right, with the folks who are providing services, and like this is a new thing. We're learning how to dance together, and CBOs too. Like we're learning how to work better with districts and how to be a better partner. So making sure that your CBO partners are invited to the table at the planning and sessions, making sure that when you ideally when you are coordinating across multiple internal departments like your community school director and your expanded learning, if you're doing that, hopefully your special ed, have that CBO partner at the table too, so that you are collaborating in the design. When you do that, you also allow for better communication to families, right? Because as a CBO partner, we've got to communicate to families, and we know the district has to communicate to families. And like if you're aligned with your CBO partner, the communication that will be much clearer to parents, and they're not going to get different messages or
Yeah.
conflicting things. So um, that's something that I think, as all CEOs, we're still learning how to do this well and work within that structure. And sometimes there's systemic things that make it a little bit more challenging, but really starting shifting that mindset from vendor to partner really will support your program.
Yeah, I remember that was a big aha. And the work group we had, sometimes we'll do work groups just with like LEAs or just with CBOs. And this work group we had a mix of folks, and then we separated, and then we got to glean and like learn from one another. And it was really eye-opening to be able to like look through the lens of your partner, whether so. That just reminded me, Eduardo, of like the exercise we did break out and then look. And it was like, oh, I had never thought about Toby getting thousands of emails a day from all these folks. Whoa, that could change your mindset. So that was definitely something that came out for sure. Well, let's move to what people are like. Toby, what has been the most challenging, or what are some of the challenges that you want to speak to, and maybe what people can watch out for? But really, what are those challenges, and how are you moving through those?
Yeah. So this is where my S's come into play. It started with like 3 S's to 4 to 5, but the challenges specifically, I will say, with staff. So expanding staff, because we have to keep these ratios, right? And we don't want to, like I said, we want to have quality staff. They need to follow all of our district protocol through our HR department, through staff, but we don't hire the staff. Our model, we have a hybrid model, but majority of our 144 schools, we have a direct contract with larger organizations, say San Diego, YMCA, those large organizations. And from listening, we've heard a lot of them, because we are allocating, we need this many kids to be filled. We need to keep those 1 to 10 TKK ratios. We need to keep the 1 to 20 first and up. So that staff, and not just the staff, but having the continuity of the training of the staff. So actually hiring the staff at finding that magic number where they're not going off to in and out to work their $20 an hour, but we want to like genuinely tap into people who genuinely love kids, and we want to build their capacity. So we've created a whole PD plan for those staff. Like, how can we give them badges? Like, future educators. We actually partnered with San Diego State, some of our community colleges. We actually partnered for staffing. One of the barriers was really with that, just actually getting them on LinkedIn or different things where we're getting people to say, oh, there's an opportunity. I want to work with San Diego Unified, but I don't have to go directly through San Diego Unified. I can become a partner with our primetime organization. So really that staffing piece and building out capacity for those staff, because we want them to be valued. We want them to build those relationships with our students. It's so important. So that was one of the first S's that we saw. And it's been a little more challenging because we've been really transparent with, here's our, we have a wait list. We don't want a wait list. We know we can't have a wait list past now, but how do we monitor that? So every month we updated, here's the enrolled, here's the applied, here's the enrolled. So that biggest barrier, I would say, was that staffing and getting them onboarded with all of their fingerprinting, and then also building that capacity to sustain those staff members. Because I don't know about you guys, but in our after school programs, it's usually those 18 to 22-year-olds that are off in college, and they go away, or if we didn't have the full robust program, we want to keep them year round. So staffing was one. The second one that we really looked at was physical space. So the space of these programs, as I mentioned before, we had licensed childcare or different clubs. And as a former principal for over 16 years, I remember I had this master schedule of, okay, chess club goes in the auditorium and this goes there. And long gone are those days, because the ELO-P is expanded, which now we're facing, along with those S's, we have a strong teachers union, and it's called SDEA. It's one of our S's, but I didn't add it here. But we want to make sure that we look at the physical spaces. We can't fit 500 kids that are during the day all into an auditorium. So we have to think creatively. What does this look like? Oh, we need to work with our labor unions and say, we need to have shared space agreements with our teachers. I know it's amazing and important to prep after school and get my classroom ready. And it's scary for those teachers to say, I don't want to give up my classroom space. That's my prep time. And I want my students to come in the morning and feel welcome. So we're working on a document that's called Best Practices for Sharing Spaces. We're working through the space piece. Also, we have in San Diego Unified, we rotate through all of our 144 elementaries and middles, something called whole site modernization. So every one of our schools, 20 of them at a year, go through, we're moving everyone into a bungalow. So that shrinks our physical space again. So that space challenge I shouldn't say was, we are still navigating that. We are still working through that. And we're still, it's a lot of those individual conversations because, you know, I can coach a principal how to have those conversations with your teachers. But if you have a strong labor, we're not sharing any space, it's not written into a contract, we're having those conversations with labor unions as well. So space is the second one. The third S is our special education. So as I think we're going to have a further meeting later, but it was something that bubbled up as, you know, when you offer universal access means universal access. It doesn't matter if you have a student who is moderate to severe, needing a feeding tube and nonverbal. We need to give them an opportunity to engage. So how have we navigated that? I have a lot of exciting ideas. This has been something I'm near and dear to my heart because we want to be fully inclusive for all children. And it has not been easy. I'm going to name that up front because a lot of our kids with special needs have additional, especially more on the moderate to severe range. You can't do a 1-to-20 staff ratio with those kiddos. There's a safety issue. Feeding tubes is one. So special ed and safety for that. You need nursing, you need wellness, all of those components. So solutions, and I know we haven't got to that yet, but we're partnering we have something in San Diego called the Regional Center. We just went out to Poway. We visited a program called Esports United, where they're actually partnering for our ID, intellectually disabled. There's one of the categories of special education is ID, free services through the county where they'll come onto our district sites and offer these amazing opportunities in a 1-to-3 ratio. So how do we partner? How do we bring organizations like Esports United on board? We're having meetings. We're going and seeing how that can exist because we want our kids with disabilities to feel that same level of learning. Obviously, we don't work on their SAI goals. We're not giving them specific SAI services, but we do want accommodations. We do want access for all of them. And what a better way than in an after school environment. So those are our top 3 S's right now. I build in safety and all of those things as well. But those are the 3 that we're really targeting intentionally to name first, but then find different on-ramps. You know, this is a freeway, we like to say. And what are the on-ramps to get more kids onto this freeway of extended learning? We have to name those barriers and we have to figure out a roadmap together. So those are really kind of our challenges right now, but I like to say challenges are just an opportunity for us to work harder and figure out new on-ramps for those kids.
Yeah, and I think it was important that you named the regional centers and different county services and Department of Social Services as a
Yes.
huge asset and resource that sometimes I can just name like we know different departments have difficult times sometimes collaborating. And then when you're talking about more separate funding streams and more separate agencies, it can be even more difficult. So thanks for highlighting that. Eduardo, I know your organization has expanded a lot in the staffing retention, and growth has been an issue too. So maybe I would love to just hear from you on how you've dealt with managing staffing up and like increasing staffing retention. And then if there's another challenge you want to speak to that's come up in this expansion, please share.
Yeah. I mean, especially in the first year too of ELO-P. And by the way, a lot of the stuff that we talk about now it's still applicable, was applicable back then as well, in those first years of ELO-P and anyone starting up a program. And so, you know, we've done a concerted effort to increase our recruiting capacity. And, you know, obviously we go to the local colleges and the online platforms and all of these places. Folks who might be interested in pursuing teaching credentialing programs. They make, you know, obviously great staff. Or, you know, we also have focus on social emotional learning. So anyone who might be on a more like the psychology pathway too. I mean, there's all great opportunities there. So kind of seeing like thinking about like what do expanded learning jobs, what other careers can they lend themselves to, and finding folks that might have an interest in that, and that this can actually see expanded learning as a gateway to other careers. And we have as an organization really prioritized our staff just as much as our kids and our programs now. And so really seeing them as like our clients as well. And so, because many of our staff come from the same communities that we serve, right? So they are facing the same barriers and the same challenges that our families are serving. They were those families just along, just 10 years ago, right? And so, how can we support those staff? And so that has been one of the real shifts, I think, in the last couple of years. And so we've been a part of a few different teacher pathway programs. And so piloting the apprenticeship program with our local community college. We've strengthened our relationships with the local community colleges. One great example is Hartnell College in Salinas, where we are piloting a new teacher pathway apprenticeship program for our staff. So our staff get free college at the local community college if they're interested in pursuing a teacher pathway. And at the end of it, they can get their IA credential. And so, and really being upfront with our partners, like, hey, with our district partners, if we lose our staff to you, that's amazing. Like, we've done our job. And again, knowing that expanded learning for many folks may be a stepping stone to something else. That there's something else in their life path, and let's figure out how we can support them. And for some folks, hey, it's going to be their lifelong career. Awesome. I'm an example of that, right? So like, if you want to make it your career, cool. Then internally, we will show you what the career path can look like, and really create opportunities for you to grow. If you want to go from an instructor to a site assistant to a site manager to a region manager, there's a very clear path of which you can grow, and we'll invest in your development if that's something that you do want to pursue internally. Um, so I think, and when you do that, and I'll also add this other part too. I mentioned we do social emotional learning. And what we do with our kids, we do with our staff. And it's the only way that you can do it authentically. It's like SEL is, you can't just do it in like for an hour. We're going to do SEL for an hour. No, SEL is a part of your culture. And so when you build it into your culture, if you build it into the way you do give feedback or do team meetings, you build it all the way in, your staff will feel supported. They'll feel like they're part of a community, a family, a culture, and that will help your retention, right? Because then they know that you care about them as a human being. You take that moment at the beginning of your team meetings to do that emotional check-in, or to share a word, maybe an emotional intelligence word you might be focusing on that week that you're going to be doing with the kids. You take that time to do that with your staff too. And so again, building that culture that also helps, again, maintain that retention. So those are a few of the things that we've done.
Thank you. And I know we have like 2 more minutes before we have to wrap. I don't know how it went by so fast. One, I also want to note that we also have created a resource on high school students, which San Diego Unified and others have done, working in ELO-P programs and becoming on a teacher pathway. So I just wanted to plug that too. There's more and more resources on staffing and how we support our staff and our young people that want to become teachers. So in the last few minutes that we have, Toby and Eduardo, I just wanted to see if you, in 60 seconds or so, had a piece of advice you didn't get to share or something you want to name that you want to leave the audience with before we break into small groups.
Eduardo, you want to go first? Or
Either one.
Oh, geez. I mean, I was looking at some talking points. I'm like, what have I not covered? I maybe one thing I would just say is like, you in this work, you kind of have to be egoless in some way. And the more you do that with your partners, like the better the program will feel. Like the more unified it'll feel to your families. Like I love my organization. I love Ed. We got a great logo, and I love it. But we've worked with partners who say like, hey, that's actually creating an othering situation in our school, because their teachers are going to like, oh, that's an Edmo staff person, not a district staff person, and there is that kind of tension that can happen in a district campus or a school campus, and anything you can do to try to minimize that. I'm like, we are happy to use the district vest, like safety vest, if you have one, and put that over our thing and cover our logo. That's fine. Like as long as folks see this as like one united program, that is going to go a long way to help, again, build those relationships, because you really need to have strong relationships between your CBO staff and your district staff, everyone from the janitorial to the teachers, to the administrators. And so anything you can do to try to make it feel like one program, it's going to go a long way in helping you build relationships.
And Toby, there was a question specifically for you, and we actually haven't gotten to blending and braiding. And I know this is a question that comes up. So I'm forcing you to speak to this too. Just maybe anything you can say or advice on blending and braiding ELO-P with the other funding sources. And if there's something else you want to add, go for it. But I wanted to make sure that there are several questions and I hadn't gotten to that.
Yes. And I think it actually piggybacks about what Roberta was just saying is like branding. We did a lot of branding work we call it in San Diego Unified, we call it prime time. That is actually multiple sources for all of our ELO programs. So we have ACEs, we have ELO-P. We also actually work with the high school assets where we have internships where they go down to our elementary. But it really is that as a district, so for the district teams out there, the way that we do, and lifting Eduardo's comment was, we have a primetime logo here with YMCA on the shoulder, ARC. It's really a branding that you can create, which is exciting. And that took a process of bringing CBOs in, bringing other people in to say, okay, how do we make sure we meet the needs of creating an inclusive plan for ELO-P ACEs, specifically as we're updating our new plan, which hopefully in a month or two we'll be putting to our board. But it is so strategic because we cannot do it alone. And it is intentional because we've kept some of those ACEs guidelines, which are much more restrictive.
Yeah.
But now with that blend and the little bit more flexibility of ELO-P, it's been exciting. So there's not a one and done answer, but it is through that mindset of approaching everything with how do we collaborate together and brand for a district, large programs.
Great. Well, I'm going to turn over to Heather in a second here. And as folks know, many of us will be staying on for how to digest some of this information. But first and foremost, just wanted to thank Toby and Eduardo for being here today, for sharing all your wisdom, for also being vulnerable to say, we're all testing things out. We're making mistakes. We're learning from them. And that is what's so important, is to be sharing that, because I find so often in education, there's a risk aversion to sharing these things, and we're all going through it together. So just thank you again for your time and the expertise and the passion that you have for children and youth. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Heather. And yeah, these conversations will be continuing. So if you found them valuable, please come back.
Yeah, thank you. And I also just personally want to say thank you to both of you. And right now there's, every day I'm encountering like tension between LEAs and CBOs, and how do we partner and what does that look like? And you both just showed up, right? This work and this opportunity is so important, and we can't do that without partnership. So I really appreciate both of you and how well you modeled that. So thank you. Thank you for sharing. And we will just have a quick closing. And so on the next slide, just wanted to elevate some upcoming opportunities. And so we have PCY will be releasing their attendance recovery memo number 3, which is really focused on the return on investment, right? So a lot of dollars being spent, but hopefully a significant return on investment. So that will be coming out this spring. And then they'll also be hosting a Boost conference workshop on attendance recovery and expanded learning. So if you'll be at Boost at the end of April, it's a great opportunity to dig in a little bit more. And then just wanted to flag, and I know there were some questions in the Google Doc and some references also in this space. Sometimes you all have very technical questions. And so a great place, in addition to reaching out to your individual members of the system of support, is to also come to the System of Support Expanded Learning office hours. So CAN co-facilitates those with a CDE Expanded Learning Division. And we have a lot of members of the county offices that join for that as well. So that's a really great, I just need, this is a really technical in the weeds question, right? And you're like, I don't even know how to put this in an email. Feel free to come to office hours. That space is great for that. And then we also have coming up just a couple weeks from now is our Spring Expanded Learning Academy. And so again, CAN co-host that with CDE Expanded Learning Division in partnership with other folks. And we'll be digging into a number of different topics. Registration, I believe, is open for that. So be sure to check that out. So with that, I believe we're coming to a close to our optional small group